A world where there is both a demon king and a hero who opposes him. Hero is someone who fights in the name of the empire. The guy was standing with a big sword and there were several people watching him. As for the demon king, he is the true ruler of the demonic realm. The guy with some kind of fur coat around his neck said that it looks like this time the hero got some aggressive. The hero gets his powers from this world and uses them for the sole purpose of killing the demon king, and now he was fighting the demon king, and the demon king himself exists to kill the hero. Someone shouted to the hero to cover him, but he asked to stop people. The girl kicked the guy and said they would deal with the weaklings, and the guy watching all this said they were them. They were corps commanders. There were several people standing there. They had good figures and good looks, and the girl who was one of them smiled and said hello. There are 12 official corps in total, from 1 to 12. These people are cruel and powerful subordinates of the demon king. They started to move and all of them said in one voice that they would all destroy them. One of them swung his sword, saying that there was no one who could stand against them. Another girl swung her spear. Someone else struck the ground with their sword, but even demons like them had a hard time dealing with heroes. The man was closing in from the wind and he was very surprised by the hero's strength. However, there is a personality that was already killing the hero. It was the Zero Corps commander. His name was Demon Arut. He was standing next to the hero lying on the floor. His identity as the Demon King's Joker is a trump card. A letter of resignation had arrived. The guy sitting with a quill in his hand and this letter on the table listened as the other said what he wanted. He finished the sentence and said he wanted to resign. And the other guy responded by hitting the desk hard and interjecting what he had just said. Papers from the table flew off in different directions. One of them flew into the face of the guy who wanted to resign. He looked up at the guy and asked how dare he even dare just pick him up and leave him. The seemingly menacing and intimidating guy threw himself at his feet and started begging him not to quit and saying he would never leave him. He refused to believe it and started asking why he was suddenly doing this to him. He just looked at him and said nothing. They stood opposite each other, and he continued to ask him about what he did not like in the Castle of Demons, or his subordinates did not show him the respect he deserved. But even questioning all this, he still thought that there was no such thing. This guy was a demon Arutus. He is someone who, although he is human, but he is undeniably strong. He possesses an overwhelming strength that cannot be obtained even by hard work. He is someone who is revered and respected by everyone. This guy is the strongest card that the Demon King has up his sleeve. Literally no one would have the courage to mess with him. Arut looked at him and answered him that his subordinates didn't do anything wrong. Now the Demon King certainly didn't understand what the reason was, and from his facial expression you could tell he couldn't understand what he was thinking, and then told him that if he didn't tell him, the matter would be bad. But the guy interrupted him and just asked him about the fact that he would kill him then. That made him a little angry. He took the guy by the shoulders and told him that there was no way he was going to kill him and he just wanted to know why. He also asked why he was saying that if he knew how much he cared about him. The guy kept pelting Demon Arut with questions, asking why he decided to leave, but he denied everything, saying it wasn't about that at all and asked for a moment. Demon Arut got a little angry and shouted at him to finally calm down. A drop of blood fell on the floor. This blood flowed from Demon Arut's nose. He apologized for staining the floor. The Demon King was infuriated by this. He started urgently asking for the Zero Corps commander's personal doctor. But no one came and he started to get angry because why the hell isn't he there when the commander is sick? The doctor came. He was sitting on his knees. He reached for the commander's hand. The Demon King asked how he was. The doctor's name was Ben, and he said that it was most likely the effects of the injury he would receive in the fight with the hero. The Demon King sat down and said that he had called the doctor here not to hear what he already knew, but to find a way to cure him as soon as possible. And if he fails, the doctor needs to know what's going to happen to him. Ben replied that he did know and he would do what he could. The commander turned to Arut and said that they should continue their conversation next time, and he really wanted him to focus on his health right now. And then, in a more aggressive tone, he told his subordinates to take Arut to his quarters. They smiled and said they would do it now. One of them took the commander by the arm. He asked not to be led and tried to say he was okay, but Ben said he wasn't and he would take him where he needed to go. He was laid on some kind of bed and there were several doctors standing around him. The doctors who were standing around were discussing the situation and were wondering how he got off so easy with such a battle. One of the doctors said that he heard that Arut is still the second strongest even in his current weakened state. They were also discussing that he is the talent closest in power to the Demon King and they really respect him even though he is human. They are really lucky to have him on their side. Someone said that they are totally screwed. Arut thought about how he just wanted to resign and live a normal life, but they just say whatever they want. Someone said they should hurry up. The guy wondered if he had killed a hero. He was asked if he felt sick and was told his pulse was back to normal, but he had a fever and the doctors asked for an emergency wet towel. They put a wet towel on his forehead and he lay there thinking about them not making him laugh. There were a bunch of doctors standing near him who bowed slightly to him and Ben said the Lord should rest. He lay in a large bed and couldn't believe he was an Arut demon. His name is Deon Hardt and he is from the Demon King's castle. He considers himself not the least bit talented and the weakest man. A girl came to him with a tray in her hands and tea on it. She said she would take the cup with her as soon as he was done drinking and Arut thanked her. The mug of tea tilted. The tea spilled and the maid apologized. The commander looked at her and asked her to come out. The girl came out happy to see their hands touching. Arut thought about the fact that it seems like she just hates him and he was even a little offended that the girl didn't even want their hands to touch. Compared to that, the Demon King really cares for Arut. The Demon King asked Arut why he was walking so late since he was not fully recovered yet and added that he had told his subordinates to watch him. The Demon King sat him at a table and told him that he won't be able to regain his strength if he eats so poorly and so he will have to eat a lot of stuff. Arut looked and said that it is too much for him. The guy thinks that the Demon King's concern is excessive. The guy lay on the bed and said that he is the only human in this demon kingdom, born with the weakest body that collapses at the slightest hint of any stress. He thought about whether all demons are so obsessed with their duties to the extreme. Arut thinks that he is mistakenly considered strong and thus he became the commander of the Zero Corps, a subordinate of the Demon King. He continued to lie there thinking that he could cram it all in for the consequences of his fight with the hero. But if anyone found out that he was naturally born with a weak body, it would be very bad. He stood up abruptly. And in horror thought that in that case he would die and he realized that he couldn't stay here any longer. He started biting his nails and remembering all the demons, so he started to get very worried and thinking that he had to get out of here as soon as possible and preferably in the most peaceful way possible because he was going to live a long and carefree life and the only way to achieve that was to get out of here. A guy named Ed abruptly ran into his room and called out to Lord Arut. Ed is the assistant commander of Zero Corps. Arut turned his attention to him. He asked if he had returned from the human world and Ed said yes. Ed took out some cube and smiled. He said he got a new mirror cube. Arut thought that Ed is one of the few demons he can feel comfortable around. Ed used to come to the human world and bring all sorts of trinkets to Arut so he can play with them to relieve his boredom. Ed gave the cube to Arut and said that maybe with this he could relieve his boredom with it. Then Ed started apologizing and said that it wasn't what he wanted to say and asked how the commander was feeling. And Arut said that he was fine now. Ed started to get indignant and asked how he could be okay and what he could do to make him feel better. And Arut thought that at the very least he should have been born earlier, but he answered differently. The guy said it was his own fault. Ed immediately started to deny it and asked him if he wasn't the one who stopped the hero to save them. Arut thought to himself. Ed looked at him and said he would find any way to cure him even if he had to beat up Ben in that case. Arut thought about what kind of nonsense he was talking about and it was like he didn't realize how powerful demons were. Ed asked him to rest properly. Arut immediately agreed. He laid his head on his hand and the guy was very grateful to Ed for taking care of him like that, because there are very few of them here. The commander thought about the fact that the Demon King also takes good care of him, even too much, but it is thanks to the Demon King that Arut survives in this place, but still this care is too much for him. Arut hopes that nothing that could cause a misunderstanding will happen. The Demon King leaned on the table and was reading something carefully. He apparently decided to read the letter of resignation. It seemed impossible to understand what he was thinking, for his face was not particularly expressive. The Demon King knew that he was indeed unpredictable from the very first moment they met. Arut carried the hero on his shoulder and it looked like he had killed him. And he also blocked the hero's self-destruct function. No one understood how he was still on his feet after that. Someone came up to him and asked him what his name was, because he thought about the fact that the Empire had sent a pretty interesting guy here. This guy had shown such great bravery and loyalty by jumping into the center of the battlefield for the Empire. He couldn't believe how such a useful person like him was sent to such a dangerous place. The boy introduced himself as Deon Hardt. He thought that if he were in their shoes, he would never have sent him to such a dangerous place with his life on the line. The Demon King held out his hand and asked if he wanted to join the Demon King's army. The Demon King said that he thought about it and realized that he had become too free after joining them, but he also thought that he couldn't send him on a mission. The Demon King read something on a piece of paper and smiled. He turned to his subordinate and said that he was calling a meeting of the corps commanders and added that it should satisfy Arut at least a little. The subordinate said she would do anything. The Demon King read the letter smiling and he repeated his phrase about it should satisfy Arut at least a little. Arut sat pensively in bed. One would have thought that he was very upset right now. Some guy called out to Lord Arut. Arut had lost the chance to rest because he was summoned by the Demon King. He thought about the Demon King himself asking him to rest, but now he was suddenly gathering the commanders of all the corps. The guy began to fear that the other corps commanders would be there as well, and he is very afraid of demons, and there are also the commanders. Everyone was discussing whether it was better for him or not, but Arut's facial expression was somehow annoyed and someone thought that he was mad because of the sudden summoning. Arut thought that he'd better watch his facial expression. He also thought about the fact that he'd better not mess with them, because if a fight broke out, he wouldn't win. Demon's guy was looking at him and she asked him if he was the guy that had been rumored, but this was the first time she had seen him in person. The guy asked if she could still remember his name and said that he was there when he killed the hero, and when the Demon King approached him and asked his name, he fearlessly answered. He introduced himself to the demons as Arut. The guy said that after such a story she can't forget his name. The girl replied that it was the most sinister name she had ever heard. Arut overheard their conversation and said that he then said his name was Deon Hardt. That guy got scared and told the girl to be careful, because it looks like Arut is in a bad mood today. The same guy said that if you think about it, he heard that he has a lot of stress built up because he doesn't have a chance to fight. He added that they better go somewhere else before he kills them for just standing here. He smiled and thought about the fact that he wouldn't be able to kill them since he is 100% weak. Arut wondered why he felt like he had a feeling that misunderstandings were getting bigger as time went on, but on the other hand, thanks to that, no one messed with him. He also thought about the fact that if he was caught here he would die immediately. He must not let anyone find out that he was weak before he gets out of here. Arut must act confident. There were two demons standing at the gate. Arut looked at them and thought that he should behave in such a way that he should not show his fear to anyone. Those two guys near the gate looked at him and were very surprised. Lord Arut confidently asked them to open the door. Arut went into some hall and someone said that last but not least the commander of Zero Corps joined them. The Demon King turned his attention to Arut. Arut was very surprised at the atmosphere in this place. The commander of the First Corps by name said that Arut should sit next to the Demon King. The commander of the Third Corps was named Asild. He thought that Arut seemed so weak no matter how he looked at him. Asild couldn't believe that he was so strong, so he would love to fight him. The commander of the Sixth Corps named Velaton thinks that completing a task is no excuse for being late, and what the hell anyway. The commander of the Fourth Corps named Adelia is sure he has his reasons. An 11th Corps commander named Ririnel pounded her hands on the table, angry, and asked what block of muscle dares to disrespect Lord Arut. Arut was sitting at the table with all the commanders. He was very scared. He wanted to go back to his room as soon as possible. The Demon King sitting next to him turned to him and asked if everything was all right. Arut replied that yes, everything was alright and apologized for being late. The king replied that it was not his fault at all as he was late on purpose. Arut thought that he was late on purpose as he just didn't want to come. A guy with a bottle approached Lord Arut and approached him with an offer of a drink. As the guy poured Arut a drink, he thought about the fact that here he was. And he shouted, "Alcohol." The guy took his glass and thought that when there are meetings in the demonic realm, you can drink as much expensive alcohol as you want. It was the only reason he was here, despite his reluctance to be here. The guy took a sip and looked at the glass. He thought about the fact that it wasn't alcohol. It looked like it was just grape juice. All the commanders looked at him. They were sitting in a strange setting around the table. Arut sat with a glass in his hand and thought about the fact that it was juice though it tasted like alcohol. He looked at them and thought that they were discriminating against him. The Demon King took his head and turned to him and said that he had ordered them to do this because of his love for alcohol. Arut was upset and asked why only him, and the Demon King asked if he really didn't know. Arut was scared and thought the Demon King was trying to save money on alcohol because he discovered how useless the guy was, and did he finally find out about him? And in that case, they were all gathered here to kill him, and the guy already imagined a rope dangling behind him. The Demon King asked to hear him out before getting angry, as he had called this meeting just for him. The Demon King turned to the commander of the 6th Corps and asked him to share the details of the document he had presented to him. Veliton said that the 12th Corps was still defending the village as their numbers had increased dramatically and they could no longer handle them. After the demon monsters wiped out half of the small village, they managed to evacuate the remaining inhabitants to a large walled city. Veliton looked at the 4th Corps commander and said that they didn't know when there would be an ambush, and so they needed as many reinforcements as possible to evict the demonic monsters. Everyone was wondering why the commander of the 12th Corps was missing and whether the demonic monsters had killed him. The one who said this should watch his language, because even simple demonic monsters could become a formidable opponent if they were grouped together. Arut watched and thought about the noise they made here, although he could understand the surprise. Demonic monsters are monsters amongst the demons who created demons. They are creatures loyal only to their instincts and desires, so they are failed products. Arut couldn't believe that the 12th Corps commander lost to these demonic monsters, but he couldn't understand what it had to do with him. Veliton said that they had been fighting all day because the demonic monsters were too many, but they didn't know the reason for their sudden increase in numbers. The Demon King folded his arms and said that the now-deceased hero used to kill these monsters back then, and it was no wonder he was killed. Lord Arut was the one who killed the hero. Arut was scared. He thought they were going to use this as an excuse to kill him, but first of all he didn't kill the hero. And moreover, the Demon King was the one who wanted to kill the hero in the first place. Arut looked at him and in his mind asked him to say something. The Demon King looked at Arut and realized something judging from his eyes. The king smirked and said that they may not worry since 0 Corps will be sent as reinforcements. Arutus was startled. The Demon King smiled and said he needed to go there to relieve the stress. He added he knew he would enjoy it. Veliton looked at him and thought about the Demon King talking as if he was sending him just to patrol the neighborhood. Veliton guesses that the king thinks that a 0 Corps commander would do something that even a 12th Corps commander couldn't do. He looked at Arut and thought about how powerful he was, that the Demon King trusted him so much. Arut said his body was not in perfect condition, and in his mind he begged him not to force him to go there. Asild asked him if he wanted to go. The demon replied that he didn't. He thought he would make excuses and say he didn't want to go after hearing the report. But most likely he suppresses the urge to rage within himself. Calmly assessing the state of his body, Arut sat with clenched fists. Asild was surprised at his attitude. Judkar though still doesn't trust him. He thinks he is really acting like a commander. Asild and Judkar sat across from Arutus and looked at him. Asild thought that he was not only strong but also capable of making good judgments, and so his desire to fight him was getting higher and higher. The Demon King said that he was not asking him to exert himself but just to take command of the 0 Corps and relieve the tension in this village, as it should be easy for Arut. Arut thought about how difficult it was. All the commanders looked at him and smiled, and he thought about how there's no way he's going there, and that's what he wants to say so badly. but he doesn't think he can voice his opinion. The boy clenched his hand into a fist and confidently said his mind was made up. He figured he didn't care if the Demon King gave him permission, and he would run away from there. With tears in his eyes, Arut said he would go there. Deep in the night, a carriage pulled by horses on a path. Arut was riding in it and thinking that this day had come after all, and ever since he tried to escape, that day was getting closer. The Demon King came to Arut and asked if he was going and apologized for sending him there so late. Arut wasn't packing his luggage for a trip but for an escape. The guy was scared and said he really wanted to go there. The stress made him sweat a little and he thought he couldn't say he was running away to the Empire. A crazy emperor who himself sent him to the Demon King and a brother who hates him to death there. But Arut thinks it's better than instant death among monsters. The boy held his head and thought about the fact that he'd better think positive thoughts. He heard that Zero Core, like Ed, are very competent, so he's sure he can escape by playing his part and they'll take care of the rest. The guy turned to Arut and said that they would be on their way soon. Arut replied that they should stay in their ranks and keep their guard up. He placed his hand on the pouch and thought that there would be no reason for him to interfere, and even the Demon King had said that he didn't need to overdo it. Arut figured that since he had stopped worrying already, it was time to enjoy some solitude. Arut had a bottle of wine in his hands. It was a special wine of the Demon Realm, a rare wine that is only made in the Demon Realm. It has an exquisite taste and is loved by many demons because of that. Arut couldn't drink it because of the Demon King during the convocation. However, they are wrong if they think he can drink it. The guy stole it when the convocation was over. He opened it. He said that they say this wine is so wonderful that it can literally make you go to the other world from enjoying it, so he should try it at least before he dies. Arut took a sip. He was insanely happy. The wine was indeed very tasty. Arut thinks it is the best drink in the Demon Realm. He finally felt alive. One of his subordinates rode up to Arut's carriage on a horse and thought about the gentleman being quiet and even pulled the curtains. It seemed to him that Mr. Arut was still not feeling well, and it might be because of the incident before their departure. The boy opened the door to Arut's carriage and addressed him. He excitedly said that he knew he wanted to ride the horse, but he better not and he should think about his health. Arut turned to him and looked at him like an idiot and thought to himself that he had no intention of riding that ferocious beast. The subordinate said okay, and added that he just wanted to watch for interest. The fellow thought about the fact that he had already been serving Sir Arutus for a very long time and could tell that he really wanted to ride the horse. And since he regularly suppressed his desires, this guy wanted to tell him that he could do whatever he wanted. The guy remembered the Demon King's words when he talked about Arutus' health. Someone turned to the lieutenant and said that there was a village ahead. The whole village was on fire. There were corpses lying everywhere. They thought that the demonic monsters had already scoured the area and went ahead. The lieutenant said that he was sure that they hadn't gotten far yet, and he didn't have time to finish his sentence as he was interrupted. There were a bunch of demonic monsters, their eyes burning purple. The lieutenant was on horseback and he told everyone to get ready for battle. He told them to fight for Sir Arutus, who was depending on them. The battle-ready demons stood in front of the battle-ready monsters. The demon girl took a swing. The monster did as well. A battle had begun in this burning village. The lieutenant began to stand. There was simply no end to the monsters. Ed was told to be careful. Some huge monster was standing over him. Ed seemed to have lost his guard. The king was approached to ask if only one hull would be enough. He read something and asked what about the demonic monsters. Jaikar stood across from him and said that they should send more reinforcements since their numbers had increased. The Demon King smiled and said that it was fine and he was sure that the Zero Corps was very strong. And besides, if they find themselves in real danger, they have him. The guy was on one knee with two swords in his hands. There's blood on him. It looked like Arutus had been wounded. Ed was really scared for him. He called out to him. Ed ran up to Arut. The boy thanked him and said that he was just about to ask him for help. Arut's knife was at Ed's nose. Arut asked if he was his enemy. Sweating and scared, Ed thought it was because of Sir Arut's addiction to alcohol. Ed denied that he was his enemy and wondered if Arut was drunk now and where he got the booze from in the first place. Arut looked at him and asked what then? Is he his enemy, and pointed to a huge monster. Something fell right in front of Arut's face. Ed was scared for Sir Arutus. Arut was sitting covered in blood leaning against the wall. He smiled and said it was him after all. Arut made a stab. He was consumed with madness. A monster was coming at him. With his bloody hand he held a sword in his hand. He took a stab at the monster. His creation was only enough to distinguish the enemy. The guy struck the monster again. Everyone watched this and marveled. This is what a zero-core commander is like. Arutus doesn't leave a single intact corpse. He stepped with his foot. Covered in blood, he said that now it was his turn. You can't stop striking even if the enemy seems dead. He smiled and took a swing. One must instill fear in one's enemies. There were many monsters, he thought to himself. How did he with his weak body manage to survive in this world? Someone sitting on the throne addressed the commander of the Zero Corps. The commander said that the soldiers sent to investigate the Demon Kingdom reported that this time the Zero Corps commander participated in the conquest and he was extremely strong and tough according to them. He had heard that the Zero Corps commander was the Demon King's most valuable talent. The blonde guy sitting on the throne said it made him miss someone. This guy was an emperor named Eduardo Desert. He said that if they wanted to leave the demon realm this way, they should prepare themselves too. Eduardo said that he seemed to have the perfect candidate and asked what he would say to that. The emperor smirked and said he wanted to give the Zero Corps commander a chance to succeed. He bowed and said he accepts the royal decree. Eduardo asked that then why wouldn't he be such a talent? 8 years of battle. For the glory of the empire, this place is drenched in blood. Among them with the noble vanguard sacrifice at the front. A guy stood with a sword in his hand and his whole body was covered in blood marks. He thought to himself, no, these are just meat shields left behind by the empire. This is a living hell. People weren't backing down, they were fighting to the death for the empire. The guy didn't want to get into this hell and he didn't want to risk his life fighting. He swung around thinking about what a great joke that was about the empire. He didn't want any of that. The guy fighting thought about how he didn't have any special intentions. He didn't want to sacrifice himself for the empire that sent him to this hell. He would do anything to survive in this place, for he refused to die simply because of someone else's wishes. The guy believed that he had to survive no matter what. And also to get revenge on them. The guy got out of bed and thought about how it was just a dream, but it was somehow meaningful. The sweaty guy held his head and thought about how he found himself in his room. Someone standing next to his bed asked if he was awake yet. Ed said he had slept all day. Ben said that while he slept they managed to finish his treatment. Arut asked if he knew how shocked he was when he came back covered in blood. Arut asked what they were even talking about and how was their mission. Ed replied that it was successful and he himself just ran away in fear. They went back to the castle to heal him after he fell. Arut apologized. He was very surprised at how the mission went well and asked what it meant that he fell. Ben thinks the guy has temporary amnesia and it was a pretty serious injury. Ben started to tell him that Arut was hit by a demonic monster, but the guy got up right away so he didn't pay much attention to it. The guy couldn't understand what he was even talking about. Arut looked at Ben in surprise and asked about the amnesia. He began to remember everything that had happened, how he had drunk, how he had been hit by the monster, and how he was sitting in blood against the wall. He thought about how he had gotten drunk and made all sorts of trouble. He gulped and thought that he seemed to have forgotten everything because he was drunk and most likely he had been beaten up badly, for there was nothing to fool around with being drunk. But there was good news. Ben said that Zero Corps finished the battle without a single casualty and there were so many monsters that it was almost impossible. Arut said he didn't do anything, but Ben thought he was just being modest. Arut thought about the fact that he seriously did nothing and it was his Zero Corps that did it all. He started apologizing to Ed for being a total burden to them. Ed was surprised and then smiled and said that wasn't true at all and Sir Arut was just great. Ed started telling how Arut defeated the monsters at the front and was just a marvelous role model for the rest of them. Ben said that he overdid it this time and they know he is strong, but due to the effects of the battle with the hero his body has weakened considerably. Ben, wiping his glasses, asked Arut to be more careful. Arut sat in shock listening to all this. Ben said they know he can't trust them completely. Ed shouted and said that they live for him. He added that they will get stronger and then Sir Arut can trust them. The Zero Corps commander's stress was very high. His blood pressure was rising and he had no idea about what they were about since he had no powers. Arut just wanted them to leave quickly, but then the other corps commanders entered his quarters. Ed Elia, the commander of the 4th Corps, said that they had been informed that Arut was awake. Asild, the commander of the 3rd Corps, told her to be quiet as Arut was just coming to his senses. Asild and Ed Elia started arguing again. She said that Asild is much louder than her now and asked why he came for her and if he wants to get punched in the face again. Asild told her to leave the jokes and here he is to pay his respects to the Zero Corps commander. Arut thought about why they are even here and are they that close. The Zero Corps commander named Jaikar also came and said that they are all the same. Jaikar stood next to Asild and said that if they came to visit Arut they should do it quietly, just greet and leave. Asild and Ed Elia looked away. They apologized for such an intrusion. He got angry and told them all to fuck off. Arutus thought about how he could get rid of them. Asild started blaming himself for being too careless. After all, maybe Arut is very sensitive and just returned and he is like this with him. Jaikar told Arut that he understands his feelings but asked him to refrain from fighting and make sure they don't kill each other. He asked what he meant by kill. Arut thought about who else would kill who here. He was also thinking that if these bastards found out how weak he was, there would be no mercy for him. Asild turned to Sir Arutus. He was thinking that he should teach them to pity their opponents for the sake of his future. He looked at them. He smirked and thought that in that case they would spare him, seeing how weak he was. Asild apologized to him in case he was angry. Arut looked at him and said that he was angry and thought that he should speak with caution and he should not show his fear. Arut said there was no point in punishing someone he was already angry at. He added that sometimes it wouldn't hurt to show mercy and asked if they had learned what that was. The guy started to imply that even if someone was weaker than them they should still learn to show mercy to others. He hoped it would work and they would spare him later. They said they would keep that in mind. Arut paid attention to the atmosphere because his words sounded like a sermon. Jaikar thought about how he is scary even when he forgives and he also said that he heard about the successful mission and added that he must have tried his best. Ed Elia smiled and said that since there were rumors about Sir Arut all over the castle and it was said that he had single-handedly killed half of the monsters, she stepped back a bit from the passageway. Arut sat there a bit in shock and was asked if he was alright. He couldn't believe he had done all this. He thought about the fact that at this rate he would be passing off other people's accomplishments as his own. Ed stood and smiled. Arutus looked at them and didn't understand what was wrong with their faces. Asild said that he too had heard of his heroism and had come to ask him for a favor. Arutus thought their conversation seemed somehow ominous. He asked what the favor was. Asild said it was nothing and after he was fully recovered, he would like to mate with him. Arut was very startled by such a statement. He thought about the fact that this was not just sparring with a demon, but between the commander of the Zero Corps and the 3rd Corps controlling the elite guards of the Demon King. Arut apparently wasn't very happy about the proposal. He looked at Asild in surprise and queried about the sparring. Asild with a smile on his face confidently replied that he often hears about His Majesty and so he would like the latter to mentor him. Jaikar found this very interesting. Jaikar thought about the fact that the Zero Corps commander had never had a sparring session since he became commander, so he was eager to see it too. Jaikar wondered if Arut would accept the offer. Ed Elia was very happy about this. She said she would gather as many spectators as possible. Asild looked at her and said he didn't care who it would be. All he cared about was that no one would interfere with their sparring. Arut interrupted them and tried to say that he didn't want to. But he can't even just say no. He looked at them and didn't understand why the hell they were making up their own minds and wondered what the hell that even made sense. Arut looked at the strong Asild and thought about the fact that he could literally blow him to pieces with one punch. Arut held his head and said that it would be quite difficult for him to accept such an offer. He added that since he was not yet recovered from the battle with the monsters and therefore he might die. The guy said without realizing what kind of nonsense he was talking about. Asild was surprised and wondered why he was avoiding the battle. Arut looked into Asild's eyes and thought that he suspected something, and it looked like he couldn't get away with simple excuses. Joykar said it was amazing. They both asked what it was. Joykar said with a smart look that now he understands why the Zero Corps commander never participates in sparring, and it's all because he is really worried about his opponents. Asild and Arut looked at Joykar in surprise. Asild then looked at Arut in surprise and asked if that was the case. Arut thought about what was even the point. Joykar said that this was the reason why he turned down the offer of sparring, and besides, not much time had passed since the last battle, and so it would be difficult for him to restrain himself in a fight. Asild clenched his hand into a fist and said that once the sparring started it wouldn't end until one of them was dead. He thought about the fact that he, for one, always knew he could fight on equal footing against any other commander, but he never considered himself a clear winner. Asild looked at him and thought how he was so confident. Then he lowered his head and said that he did not have the guts to fight Arut as he could not guarantee his victory. Asild bowed to Arut and said that although it hurt his pride, he was very grateful for his answer. Arut was very surprised that he had given up. Ed looked at him and thought that as expected. Sir Arut is incredible, and even these cold-blooded and fierce commanders treat him with such respect. Arut's face was not very pleased, and Arut didn't understand why, but he thought it was all for a reason. Asild smirked and said that he hadn't completely given up yet, and when he had built up enough strength and confidence to know for sure that he wasn't going to die, he would ask to spar again. Arut became anxious again and thought about the fact that he didn't want to, and in his mind begged him to give up already. Asild clenched his hand into a fist and smilingly said that ever since he made his promise to Sir Arut he felt so inspired. Here Arut called him out. But he was so inspired that he had already gone to practice. Arut asked him to wait. But Joykar said he had already left. Adelia with a displeased face said that he is so noisy and loud. Joykar looking at Arut said that Asild had no ambition to go further, but Joykar thinks that thanks to Sir Arut he got the desire, and it is very good. Arut said that it drives him crazy. Arut grabbed his head and Ed immediately rushed to his aid. It seems Arut's fever has risen again. Ed turned to the others and said that Arut needed more rest. Joykar and Adelia were already leaving. They apologized for that and wished him a speedy recovery. Arut's face did look really sick and tired. They gave him a glass of water and told him that he needed to drink more fluids, but Arut was only concerned about escaping from the demon kingdom. Joykar decided to add. He too had asked for a battle after Arut had recovered. And looking at him, Ben and Ed said he was looking forward to it. Arut just collapsed on the bed. Ed and Ben started worrying. Arut's heart was beating very fast. He couldn't leave the thought that he should already escape from the demon kingdom. Ed and Ben standing over him fussed a lot and asked him to calm down. Arut leaned on the pillar and lowered his head. He said that he was very tired and he needed to get out of here somehow. Everything was jumbled in Arut's mind. His stress level was incredibly high. He was thinking about Ed's words that he needed to meet the members of Corps Zero. Ben's words that if he sat in his room 24 hours a day he would not heal and needed moderate exercise. And Asild's words about their sparring. Arut wondered what everyone wanted from him. He kicked a rock and yelled for everyone to leave him alone. The stone went flying somewhere. Some demons turned around and apparently they weren't too happy about it. One of them asked who it was. The other said what an asshole he was. They turned around to him and Arut realized he was done for, so he started apologizing. But these demons immediately bowed when they saw Arut and apologized for causing some kind of disturbance. Arut asked what disturbance meant. Some child was sitting on the floor and these demons said that they wanted to teach him a lesson. After all, he was blocking their way being just a lowly incubus. One of them added that they would take care of it and try not to disturb Sir Arut. She looked at him with her pretty eyes and thought about the fact that it was the commander of the Zero Corps, Sir Arut, and he looked at the child and thought about the fact that he had heard that incubi were the lowest rank in the demon realm, and so those demons had bonded and bullied that child. One of those demons thought that Arut was in a bad mood today and said that they had better leave. Arut looked at that boy and thought about how it was very good that those demons ran away by themselves, but he has no idea why. The boy wondered about what he should do with that kid, and since it was the first time he was looking at a demon weaker than him, he was concerned. The boy lowered his eyes and thought about the fact that Arut is usually quiet, but in anger he is known to be more violent than any other demons. The boy thought that his presence disturbed Arut. Tears flowed from the boy's eyes because he thought that this time he could definitely die. Arut held out his hand and offered to help him stand up. He said with a slight smile that he didn't have to worry, for those bastards were already gone. The boy was pleasantly surprised, for Arut's eyes looked at him not with disgust, but with benevolence. He wept again, for it had been a long time since he had been treated with kindness. The boy said he was an incubus and asked if Sir Arut was disgusted by the fact that he would be in physical control with them. Arut took the child's hand himself, picked him up off the floor and asked him what was the big deal, and asked him that if he thought so, then logically he should be disgusted with him too. The boy with a tear on his cheek immediately said that he was not. Arut held his hands on the boy's shoulders and with a smile on his face said that he thought so too. So the boy could take it easy and thought about the fact that the boy was also trying to survive in this harsh realm of demons. The boy lowered his gaze and asked how he could be so kind, and he was so happy to be treated so kindly, because no one had ever treated him like that before. The child looked at him with a smile and said that he could repay him with pleasure and asked when Arut had free time. Arut was a bit surprised. He had a feeling that he was involved in something unnecessary.